Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to equality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products, so visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. Aistear, the Early Childhood Curriculum Framework, was initially launched in 2009 and it was updated in 2024. It was updated, as we've mentioned before, to reflect the myriad changes in the early years sector and indeed in Ireland since it was first published. And as regular listeners know, we're taking a closer look at some of the key changes and hearing from a variety of people to talk about their views on these changes, their involvement with the update, the process of the update, and implications for practice. So in that regard, I'm delighted today to chat with Grainne McKenna about the concept of the Agentic Educator, which is a central aspect of the updated Aistear. Grainne is an assistant professor of early childhood education and care at the Dublin City University Institute of Education. She teaches in the Bachelor of Education in Early Childhood there and the Masters of Education in Early Childhood Education. And she has a special interest in early intervention, child poverty, and teacher-child relationships. Grainne has worked as a primary school teacher. She's a qualified developmental and educational psychologist with expertise in assessment and evidence-based interventions for children, families, and educational professionals. She has extensive experience across the broader early childhood sector and has held positions with government and national voluntary organisations in Ireland, the US, the UK, and the British Overseas Territories. In 2022, along with Dr. Geraldine French, Grainne was the co-principal investigator of the literature review to update and enhance Aistear. So, Grainne, you're most welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And I really look forward to hearing more about your thoughts on the concept of the agentic educators. I want to talk about the literature review, and I know you've done research and you see parallels between Albert Bandura's work on the concept of self-efficacy. So, Grainne, you're really welcome, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So, maybe before we get into the specifics of the your work on the Agentic Educator and Bandura and so on, can you tell us a little bit about the literature review that you were involved in for NCCA that I mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was 2021, the NCCA went out seeking expressions of interest for academics to really look at what does the science tell us about early childhood curriculum globally. So what's the empirical evidence for what works and what enhances the lives and the learning of young children? So myself and colleagues from the School of Language, Literacy and Early Childhood Education here in DCU Institute of Education, we submitted our interest in completing that work, and we were really lucky to be chosen to do that. So there were a team of 14 of us all together, so early childhood academics and researchers from both early childhood education and early childhood aspects of primary education. So our colleagues on the BEd as well. And what our job was to do was to really scan in a very systematic and strategic way all the science, the studies, the literature that is relevant to early childhood curriculum and the learning experiences of young children over really the last decade. And so we were looking at literature from when Aistear was first introduced in Ireland, so 2009, all the way then up to, we had papers that were very current at that time, so 2021 and then going into 2022. So that literature review looks at the different sort of aims and outcomes of Aistear, and looked at what we were doing really well in Ireland, and then to see if there were any areas that needed a little bit more attention, a little bit more curiosity when we were developing our revised and renewed Aistear curriculum. And one of the areas that you mentioned, and this really reflected a wider movement in the sector and what was happening in early childhood services, was this notion of agency. That was a key theme that kept coming up.
I think it's really interesting that, in the update of Aistear, it's clear how much the sector developed over the years between 2009 and when the process of the updating started. And it's one of the things I love about the update is that it reflects the way the sector progressed, and now it kind of gives us the next steps to move forward. So it's I think it's supporting everybody. It's recognizing the changes, the developments, the quality that has developed in that time, and now is giving us kind of a roadmap on where to strive for next.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned there, early childhood educators across Ireland were instrumental not only in contributing to the update, but without their efforts, without their interest in the curriculum, it remains a book. It's just a document. But across Ireland, in thousands of services, every day we have early childhood educators and managers too who are really interested in using a curriculum as, and the totality of the learning experience to think critically about what can we do to really support children's well-being, their learning, their growth and their development. So it was very much led by those in the sector, and what we found in the literature review complemented a lot of that.
The two have to go hand in hand. Research and practice have to go hand in hand, and I think we see it every day in early childhood Ireland. The exemplars of good practice that we hear about when we're doing online training, the various CPD programs that we've been involved in on nature literacy, the concept of eco emotions that is ongoing in our work, the work we did, and I know we'll be coming back to it later on pedagogical leadership and so on. The drive and the thirst for knowledge and ongoing development of quality is immense. So, I think it's lovely that the update reflects all of that. So the agentic educator, Grainne, how do you define that? How do you kind of put into words what that concept of agency means in relation to educators?
Yeah, I think I would probably start with the word agency, first of all, and our shared understanding of what that is, because I often joke that the word agency only appeared once in the first iteration of Aistear, and it was to describe what the HSE was as a healthcare agency. But in the updated version, we have a much broader understanding of agency as being this notion that we have capacity to act and to choose and to have influence. And the notion of agency in the updated Aistear refers to, there was different mention of it, but we have the agentic child who is confident, who has capacity, who has influence. And then there's also this a really important part of the agentic educator. And the agentic educator is the person who sees value in their work and what they're doing. I think there's a piece about also this idea or notion of sharing wonder and awe with children. So sharing moments of discovery, sharing experiences, someone who really supports children and their colleagues to be curious about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the agentic educator is one who responds to children's interests and preferences. They have an awareness and a curiosity about where children come from. What are their funds of knowledge? What do they bring with them? And what are their interests? So that's an awareness of their family, of their background, of their community as well. And the other piece, I suppose, that really strikes me in this notion is the agentic educator sees the potential of deep learning. So we're not just knocking through the day, going through a series of learning experiences or activities. We're deeply curious about the deep learning experiences that are taking place and the important influence that we have over those. So really understanding our own influence in the work that we do. And as I've been thinking about and researching about this notion of the agentic educator, particularly in our work, because I work primarily in educator education, so training those that want to work in the sector. And I'm thinking about them as agentic educators and they're feeling confident and competent and wanting to stay working in the field of early childhood education. And one of the bits that I've I suppose come to is the notion that the agentic educator is one that values themselves as a professional. They know and understand the importance of their work. They know that their job is one that has meaning and that makes a really, really positive difference to children and families and community. And so I'm a little bit obsessed at the minute with this notion of the agentic educator who has a really strong sense of self-efficacy.
You know, when I'm hearing you describing that concept of the agentic educator, to me, it again underlines, which is probably one of my passions, the whole idea of slow relational pedagogy, because you can't do any of what you've just described, which is so important. If your
Yeah.
day is filled with ticking the box to say you've done an activity, ticking the box to say that this, that, or the other has been done, it has to
Yeah.
be slow. It has to be built on relationships, and they all just tie in together. And I suppose if you see the slow relational pedagogy as kind of a foundation on which the agentic educator is built, in some ways you could say self-efficacy maybe is a kind of an umbrella over them all. So, you know, what led you into this work on self-efficacy, and, you know, and what is it, if people haven't heard of the idea before?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I suppose what led me to it, you mentioned it, at the very start. So my background was in teaching, and then I worked as an educational psychologist. And one of the things that I always found in working with teachers, whether it was in early childhood or primary or secondary, was that, as a psychologist, you could make a recommendation for a child, but the impact of that recommendation really relied on the commitment of the teacher or the educator to the children, and the interventions or the approaches that worked really well, they were always because they were implemented by educators who had a shared goal, which was children flourishing, right? So I'm obsessed with teachers, I'm obsessed with educators. Like, I can't wait to go back out on our placement visits now this semester, because we get to go into rooms and we get to see people whose job it is to support children flourishing. And I just love that. And so I'm interested in, how does that happen? So what's the difference between the teachers and and I'm going to use the term teachers. I know that can be a bit of a debate, but when I talk about early childhood educators, for me, they are the first and primary teachers. So I'm going to use that term teachers as I'm speaking today. And the teachers within early childhood settings, they're sort of the ones that really make the difference, are those that I see have this sense of how important their work is, and this sense of efficacy and self-efficacy. So I'm important, my job is important. And there's a famous psychologist called Albert Bandura, and he talks a lot in his theories about this notion of self-efficacy. It's used by sports people, it's used in organizations, but essentially it's this idea of feeling confident and competent in the role that we have. And he talks about, and this is one part of his writing that I love, is that we have four sources, key sources of self-efficacy. And so what I've been doing is really thinking with educators. So I do some work with communities of practice through the childcare committees, I'm doing some work with Early Childhood Ireland as part of your pedagogical leadership, really thinking about what are these sources of self-efficacy? How can I feel confident and competent in my practice as an educator? And so if it's helpful, I'll maybe, will I bring you through some of those, Maura?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Do
Great.
please.
So now don't worry, there's no quiz at the end, but I'll just go through the four of them. But the first one is this notion that we need to have what's called mastery experiences. So we need to have feelings of success, of something going well because of what I did, because of my influence. So, I was trying to think of like practical examples. So, say, for example, we have STEM modules here. So, we're quite interested in promoting science, technology, education. With our students. So one student was talking about how they had been out in the outdoor play area and, it was an experience that worked well. Okay, so this is a mastery experience for her. And they were out in the outdoor play area and they were lifting up, old pieces of wood. And in that wood, there were loads of little creepy crawlies and wood lice. And she thought to herself, well, this is a possibility. I could potentially use this example to promote sort of science thinking about habitats and animals. And so she took the woodlouse out and she very bravely she held it in her hand, and some of the children saw her looking at that very curiously, and they came over and she was asking questions like, what is this? Where do they live? What do they eat? And then this sort of this was a provocation for the children to become really, really interested and really curious. And that sort of spark, led to a longer term investigation about children exploring habitats, thinking about where woodlouse live and where they thrive and why they're there and what their jobs are. And this really deep, engaged learning. And as she was explaining it to us, I could see the cogs turning. That's a mastery experience. She reflected on her practice. She understood what exactly happened to spark and create and continue a really rich and meaningful learning experience for children. She hadn't gone in with the notion of what she was going to do that day. She had an idea that she wanted to draw out this sort of scientific investigation. But a mastery experience is something when we reflect on what happened and it was successful, and that happened because of what you did. And we all need to be able to reflect on things that we've done and feel really positive about them. Sometimes we tend to get hung up on the things that didn't work or when we had a bad day. But mastery experiences is being very intentional about thinking and reflecting on how that works. I'm sure you've seen
Yeah.
experiences of that,
But
Maura, in your work, have you?
absolutely. And there's the emergent curriculum is so evident there, that concept of, I'm going to do something sciencey today, but I'm
Mhm.
not quite sure what until we're outside and we see what evolves. And when you're saying
Yeah.
about, the reflecting and the mastery, there can be a bit of that too sometimes in when things don't go well, is that it's then a learning experience for you. You don't have to feel bad about it. It's kind
Yeah.
of, I shut that down when I said that. I
Yeah.
I led it too much. I didn't let the children discover enough. And I think there can be mastery in that too, that it isn't
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
when
And
it
knowing
turns
that you,
into an investigation that goes on for ages, it can
yeah.
be, ooh, that could
Yeah.
have been better, but I'm still glad I did it, started it that way.
Absolutely. And that notion that you can shift the direction, that again, that's the agentic educator. Like it didn't work this time,
Mm.
but I have the capacity to do that differently the next time. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I like the energy of Bandura's work because it is very positive. It's about how we can shift our thinking
Mhm.
and our practices. So that's the first one.
That's
And
the
I
first
think
one.
that's something that, I've brought into my practice and working with educators, and you could bring into a service and working with your colleagues, reinforcing to people what went well, and allowing them to see their mastery experiences.
That kind of
So,
language is in Shielta as well, isn't it? In the interaction standard, I think about children experiencing mastery and success.
yeah.
And of course, it's the educators, the teachers that uh, create that environment in which children can experience mastery and success. You kind of can't do it with the children unless you have it
Absolutely.
in your own career, in your own work.
Yeah, we have to do
So
it for ourselves.
we
Yeah.
do, we do.
Um,
So the second one.
so the second one, now they're all sort of connected, right? So the
Mm,
second one, big fancy word, Maura. So it's vicarious experiences. And what that means is that we need to be given opportunities or take opportunities to see a master in action. So we need to have really good examples that we see and that we have opportunities to engage in. So whenever I was a teacher, one of the things that used to happen, it was in the UK, but in the area that I worked in, we would have these beacon schools, and you could go to visit a school that did a really good job, for example, of music education. So I was really into thinking about music and how we use music with young children. And I was able to go and observe a teacher giving a music lesson and draw from that. So vicarious experiences are about opportunities to watch a master in action. But the best way of doing that is is informally. It's not necessarily like, an audience with Grainne McKenna. It's actually watching someone in their natural habitat, so a naturalistic setting. They're in their classroom. This is the work that they do every day, but giving others an opportunity to share that practice and observe it. So it could be, for example, that within a setting you have someone who really, really makes the most of like reading a story. Maybe they're working on like a dialogic style. You see the children, they're completely engaged. They're joint storytellers. The children are finishing off the rhyming strings. They're engaging in sort of multimodal movement along with the story, whatever it might be. And in every setting and service, there's always somebody who's really good at something. So that example of dialogic reading, if that Sheila is just captivating for the children, is there an opportunity in your service for you to observe that, to witness what she's doing that's so successful, and to be given time and opportunity to name those skills? So watching others and thinking really critically and naming, what they're doing. Because there is a human piece that when we see others doing it, hopefully, if we're building up our self-efficacy, that when we see others doing it, that we might say, oh, I could do that too. I could give that a go. And then it may be that we're, affirmed by them. But a second part of this, a key source of self-efficacy, of knowing that we can do something ourselves, that we have influence, is being given time and opportunity and encouragement to watch other masters in action. So that's the second one. That's the vicarious experience.
And
And I suppose,
to me, that speaks hugely to in your context as a university lecturer, the value of students seeing masters
yes,
when they're on placement in quality settings. Because
absolutely.
we all tend to replicate what we see rather than what we read. So,
Yeah.
if you see quality in all its aspects when you're on placement, you're way more likely to replicate that when you are in a position yourself in a setting when you've graduated, when you've finished your training.
Absolutely. It's so important. And funny, our students, they've just started out in their placements this week. And that's one of the things that we would be saying to them, just watch that first week, just settle in, just watch comfortably. Ask the early childhood educator in the room if you can have that affordance, because it's certainly not doing nothing. It's really intentional, curious observation of others. And we are hopeful, and we do know, like they come back with just wonderful observations and experiences from their placement settings. So we do know that there are really high quality experiences happening. But one of the challenges is for those working in the sector, when you're in a busy room, when you're trying to maintain ratios, when there are demands upon staffing, how do we get the time and the space to watch, to have these vicarious experiences? And that's a real challenge that we must recognize as well.
It's a huge challenge for sure, for sure. But I
Yeah.
think if we vocalize and recognize the value of it, it
Yeah,
might, it might, if we value something, maybe we can create little pockets.
absolutely. And
Mm,
so, and that I suppose that brings us on to nicely to the next source of self-efficacy, which is this idea or concept of social persuasion. And really, that is the power of encouragement. So, encouraging and noticing others. So, and it's not just, because I think actually as educators and teachers, we're really, really good at this. So we know that we don't just say like, oh, good boy, or well done, or, it has to be credible feedback. So it has to be sort of skill specific, not outcome based, that we notice that what's actually happening. We notice what people actually did. So sort of examples of social persuasion would be that, say, for example, I'm in the block area, and I notice that, it's a bit of a chaos zone. So it's there, and there's children, getting into arguments. They're becoming heightened, overexcited in that area, and there's always chaos. And so I say, do you know what? I am going to maybe work with the children and reorganize this area and then move it. And we'll see if we spread it out a little bit or we move it away from that corner. Let's see if that makes any difference to them. And as the children become and start working with it, you notice that difference, that it's not as built in or they're not as overexcited. So in that instance, social persuasion would be encouraging others to say, that was a great idea to move that. I can see that it's given the children more space and they can access those blocks a lot more readily. And did you notice that they actually were much more collaborative in their play? And I think the reason that happened is because you gave them that space and that you sat alongside them while they were doing it. So the third component, this social persuasion, is really about credible encouragement and affirmation of good practice when we see it. Okay, so the vicarious experience is that we're given the opportunity to see it. Social persuasion now is that we open up a relationship and a style and a way of being among ourselves where we offer each other credible feedback on skills and on experiences that worked out within the service.
absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
we can do this, we can do this in our own lives as
for
well. So
sure.
you
Mm.
can do this in terms of, credible feedback, on a really nice dinner that your husband made. Or, if your child is, helping you, clear up toys, you can offer credible feedback about that's so helpful. Because I wanted to get those things out of the way so that I can move this. So this notion of
Mm.
social persuasion is quite powerful. And then the last one that Bandura talks about as a key source of self-efficacy, and I'm really interested in this actually. And it's harder. This one's harder, and it's quite personal. Is that he describes it as an awareness of our physiological and affective states. Okay, so that is asking yourself, how am I today? And
That's
it's asking
a tougher
yourself,
one for sure.
isn't it? And
For
and and I
sure.
feel like we're aware of it with children, like we see children coming in and we think, oh, they're going to need a bit more extra time this morning. Or, oh, it's a Monday, so we're transitioning back from the weekend. So we're going to go real easy on this Monday morning, bring them back in. Or we know that coming up to break time or lunchtime, children are more hungry. So, we move through things quickly. I think we're really good at being aware of children's physiological and affective states. But in order to have a good sense of self-efficacy, you have to know yourself. So you have to be aware if your jaw is tightening. you know, at moments of transition as we're coming back in from playtime and everything's noisy. We have to be aware of if we're hungry. And so, you know, with that little bit less bandwidth before our own lunchtime.
The hangry feelings don't start to
Oh, I know. Yeah.
manifest.
Yeah. No, hungry manifestation. Exactly right. Yeah. And being really conscious of our state, so both physiological and affective, so how we're thinking, how we're feeling in ourselves, you know, how full our cup is. But then also being conscious and interpreting that and being willing to adjust it or shift it as well. And for me, that's the bit that I'm not sure how we're going to support our teachers in early childhood settings with this, because it is a hugely physically demanding job. It is so psychologically demanding to be so responsive and so attentive to young children and each other. And we really need to maybe have wider collective conversations about this, because very often, you know, and I know I work in a university, but we're still in services a lot. Like I volunteer with community-based services, we're in and out because of our placement visits. And, you know, very often we'll pull up and we'll see early childhood educators eating their lunch in the car because they don't have a staff room. We see inadequate spaces, you know, even for just like changing before you go home, or for just sitting and having a cup of tea and relaxing on a break time. So there's very critical questions to ask about how we are prioritizing the physiological and affective needs of those working in our services. But you know what I'm talking about today in terms of Bandura is that we do these four things for ourselves. So I have to start off thinking about ourselves. So they're really important, I suppose, that
But
notion
that
of
last one is
awareness of it.
it's a huge challenge for, let's say, managers. So, you know, you're a manager, room leader, whatever, and you know that the staff member in that room, you know, maybe has a partner who's ill or a parent who's ill or something like that. You know, they need a bit of time out. But if they
Hmm.
leave the room, they're out of ratio.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, it's hugely challenging within settings. Just like you've said, it can be about um, you know, the break, inadequate provision for spaces for breaks and so on. So,
Hmm.
you know, have you thoughts on how we can help some of that? How, you know, in the here and now, how we can
Yeah.
kind of support some of that, and then, you know, the wider, more systemic ways in which it can be influenced and changed and improved.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I think the first thing, like, it's not like you can wave a magic wand and suddenly have, you know, relaxation suites in early childhood settings. I think the first piece really for me is to draw our attention to the importance of it. So to highlight to people that an awareness of your health, your well-being, your physiological state, and your mental health and well-being are really it's critical that we and the wider sector pays attention to that. If we're in the business of supporting human flourishing for small children, our work is deeply human and it's deeply relational. And so we have an obligation to look after those teachers, those humans that work in those service. And sometimes I do think that discussions about affordability of childcare that permeates the public discourse, I think sometimes that really minimizes the important human, deep thinking, relational work that we are engaged in.
For
And
sure.
for me, I find discussions about, you know, making childcare cheap, right?
Mm,
I actually think even just changing that conversation to making early childhood about, you know, human flourishing, about the importance, the value of this work is really significant. You know, so changing that shift of how we're seen one of the things when I talk to educators that they do sometimes talk about that affects their well-being, their affective state, is that sometimes they feel that their work has become quite transactional.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about money and what it costs and, numbers and ratios, and that those wider public conversations, that then permeates down into even relationships with parents, where what they are offering is sometimes viewed as a transactional commodity, and that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But one of the things
But the
that,
whole policy discourse is very much on the affordability, and
Mhm.
quality comes in as second. Affordability is important, of course it is. We know it's important. But the quality, the importance of those early years, the concept of flourishing, which I love, should at
Mhm.
the very least be getting equal billing, if not coming in above the affordability, while recognizing the importance of the affordability bit as well, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, early childhood educators, we live in a time where we talk about influencers. Early childhood educators are the most significant educational influencers for anyone. Okay, so more so than in
Love
any
that.
stage.
Mm,
We are really, really significant influencers of future trajectories for children most importantly in the now, but in those future trajectories. And I do think a value of that is really important. And there's a gorgeous paper, Maura, and it's open access, so I can send you the link for it. So it's by a lady called Delia Vicente and colleagues, and she works in Head Start programs in America, where they looked at at turnover and retention across those services. And what you pay people is really important. So low wages is a factor for why people leave. But actually, the reason that people stay is that they have a job with meaning and purpose. So they knew that their job had meaning and purpose, and it made a positive difference to children and families. The second reason why people stay is that they are seen as professionals and they have access to professional development. And that doesn't just mean like moving up the grades, right? That's not what they're talking about. That they are given opportunities to have mastery experiences, to be better, right? So that was the second reason why she talked about they stayed. And then the third one was, now obviously the children is a big factor, the love of children, but actually when we talk to people, it was positive connections with colleagues. So when we stay in jobs, it is because we know our job has purpose, because we see that we're learning every day, we're having positive professional development experiences. And the third thing is that we work with people that we like. And that makes sense. That I
mm.
would say that about every job that I've
Yeah,
had,
every
those
job.
same
Yeah.
three things. But really thinking about maybe how we can draw together these ideas about self-efficacy and think critically about, retention within the sector and how we see ourselves as agentic educators. So they're just some of the things that I suppose I'm researching, and I'm also embedding in my own teaching here in DCU with our students of early childhood on the bachelor program, but also in our master's
Yeah.
program.
Yeah, it's also important, and obviously, when I mentioned about quality, the pay that people receive is so important. We have amazing quality in so many settings at the moment, and that needs to be recognised and valued by having terms and conditions, and that includes all those aspects you mentioned, and so much of it ties in with the pedagogical leadership idea, that idea of being leaderful in your own role, that idea that pedagogical leadership isn't just the manager or the room leader, that everybody in a setting can have a role in pedagogical leadership. So, Grainne, have you anything else that you'd like to add before we start to wrap up?
No, I think the main thing is what I would love for your listeners is just, I suppose, to have an awareness or a notion of that self-efficacy and apply it to their own practice and their own experiences. And I hope it's a hopeful, I hope it's a helpful way to look at practice and look at ways of building our belief in ourselves, and the importance of our work.
For sure. It's so interesting, and and the 4 steps, and how it gets a little bit more challenging, some of the mastery and the vicarious experiences is kind of happening maybe to a greater or lesser extent, and maybe having attention drawn to it will create more intentionality around opportunities for it to be recognized when it happens, and then moving up the social persuasion and the awareness of yourself, that is that bit more challenging, and highlights the need for more recognition from a funding and valuing and state recognition of the importance of the sector. So much to think about, Grainne. My head is buzzing. Thank you so much for taking part.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been a delight talking to you about this. Thank you.
Thanks again, Grainne. And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.